just to give you guys a little context of who we're getting our information from today, Dr. Hood is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering, and the National Academy of Medicine. Now, you have to be elected to be, part of this. And of the 6,000 scientists worldwide who have ever belonged to one or more of these academies, Dr. Hood has been elected to all three and is only one of 20 members ever to do that.
When I went out into the community in 86 and 7 and 8 with others and started advocating for the Human Genome Project, I would say initially 80% or more of the biologists were firmly opposed to it. In 2003, first preliminary draft was given, and what was absolutely clear at that time was this was the beginning of a new type of medicine. The key to dealing with disease is not treating it. It's predicting it early and preventing it from happening. And we, in data-driven health, have figured out how to do that very, very nicely. It's my pleasure, Rome.
This is Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast for patients.
This is Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast dedicated to patients and their caregivers to advocate for a precision medicine approach to their healthcare, which includes disease screening, prevention, treatment, and survivorship. You can catch us at geneticsforhealthcare.com. From there, you can go to any of our social media platforms. Wherever platform you listen to this right now, just reach down and hit subscribe. We've got data that says like 60%, 70% of our listeners are not subscribers, which is great. But we'd love for you to follow us on your favorite platform, especially YouTube, so you can get updates on amazing new content like this one. So I gotta ask you kind of the origin story. Where'd you grow up and what inspired you to a career in medicine?
I grew up in a small town in Montana. We had 41 in my high school class, for example. What really got me started thinking about science is when my youngest brother, 6 years younger than myself, was born, he had Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. And this was in the mid-40s. So I asked our physician what caused it, and he had absolutely no idea. And that amazed me. And in fact, it was 20 some years later when chromosomes were defined, and we found out that Down syndrome is really the presence of an extra chromosome generally, that one realized how complicated this disease is. But going to high school in a small town in Montana, I had 4 of the best teachers I ever had. And I mean, they were really inspirational. They treated me as a colleague and changed my whole horizon in thinking about things. And I remember one asked me to teach sophomores biology with him because he was a chemistry teacher and didn't know a lot of biology. So I did it from Scientific American. And I would say the event in high school that really pushed me toward biology was teaching in 1956 to sophomores about the structure of DNA 3 years after Watson and Crick had actually discovered it. And I thought, if this is the essence of what biology is about, it's incredible. And I think I understood maybe a tenth of a percent of what the implications were, but they did push me to biology. And my same chemistry teacher actually had been during World War II a navigator who went to Caltech and got training there. And he swore he'd send any good students he had in the future to Caltech if he possibly could. So he came to me and said, look, you should go to Caltech. I'd never heard of it. And I said, look, they require advanced math, calculus, and things like that. I haven't had it. And he said, it'll be no problem. So anyway, I went to Caltech, and it set the framework for my thinking about human complexity, which is what we're going to talk about.
All right. So just for more context, folks, he talked about teaching this. He and his colleagues developed sequencers and synthesizer instruments that paved the way for the Human Genome Project's successful mapping of the understanding of the human genome. Just more context. I got to sprinkle these in, Dr. Hood, for our audience to really understand the perspective they're getting here. So in podcasts, we talk about the genome. We've talked about different aspects of our genes. As many of our listeners have heard, our DNA comprises approximately 3 billion base pairs in humans, which are organized into genes, 20,000 genes, which provide specific instructions for making proteins, but that only makes up 1% to 2% of our total genome. It is the non-coding regions, the 98 to 99%, often called the non-coding, contains crucial aspects that control when genes are turned on or off. But as we mentioned, you're the CEO of Phenome Health. Can you help us understand the difference between the genome and what's a phenome?
Yeah. Well, to give you a little context, I'll just tell you that in 1970, I went to Caltech as a young assistant professor. And, like all young assistant professors, said to myself, what do I want to do now I've grown up? And I had, since the episode with my brother, a real interest in human complexity. But I became increasingly convinced by studying molecular immunology that human complexity was incredibly complex. And what I realized in 1970 is we had no good tools for being able to assess from humans the nature of their complexity. And that was when we actually put together the sequencers and synthesizers that formed the framework of modern biology. And most important, one of them, the automated DNA sequencer, made it possible for the first time to actually think about the genome. So in the spring of 1985, I was one of 12 people that went to Santa Cruz with the objective of deciding whether we should do the Human Genome Project or not. And the sequencer gave us hope that this actually could be done, although it was still challenging. But what was very interesting is of the 12 of us, half of us were absolutely opposed. And they were opposed because big science, they feared, would sweep up all the money and leave little science devoid of resources and so forth. And in fact, when I went out into the community in 86 and 7 and 8 with others and started advocating for the Human Genome Project, I would say initially 80% or more of the biologists were firmly opposed to it. And of course, what really made a difference was when 6 of us went to Senator Domenici in New Mexico, and he actually had 2 large national labs in his state, and he realized that they could play a central role in this Human Genome Project. So he said, look, I'll solve your problem for you. I'll give you $3 billion to start the Genome Project that's new, so you can go out and tell the biologists you've actually added to the money that the federal government is giving to biology. And that was the beginning of the acceptance of the Human Genome Project. And of course, in 2003, first preliminary draft was given. And what was absolutely clear at that time was this was the beginning of a new type of medicine. Because what was clear even at that time is your genome sets your ability to be healthy at the high end and at the low end. It has positive things that if you reinforce them can really increase health, and it has negative things that you'll have to be able to deal with. And of course, the really interesting question that came up at that time then was, well, if the genome sets this general framework, if it provides, as you defined, the software for building a human being and everything, what happens when we go from the fertilized egg all the way up to an adult human being and finally die? And of course, the change in phenotype across there fluctuates between upper and lower limits that the genome sets, depending on two really important aspects of your environment. One is your own behavior, and that has to do with exercise and sleep and diet and many other things. And the second is your environment. Those are the two big imperatives that actually define the phenotype and how you exhibit your potential in a positive or in a negative sense. And we can measure that phenotype beautifully by looking, for example, at the blood, because it bathes all the organs in the human being, and organs secrete molecules unique to themselves into the blood. And if you can identify those, we can, from the blood, look at the state of 25 major organs in your body and determine an enormous amount about state changes when you go from wellness to disease or things like that. So in a sense, blood is this wonderful window of assessing health and disease. And of course, one of the things we really had to be able to do then was to take this enormous amount of data we generated from the genome and from the phenome. And from the phenome, we looked at things at roughly every 6 months so we could see longitudinally how the individual was changing. And the question is, how do you analyze all of these data? And one of the really critical aspects of that was the emergence of what we call systems biology. And I'd actually first started thinking about systems approaches to biology back in the early 1970s and everything. And the initial grants I put into NIH were all dismissed as pie in the sky kind of things, that there was no proof for it. When you ask them to support something new and they come back and tell you, well, we're not going to support it till you prove it. Well, it takes money to be able to prove it, obviously. So anyway, that lay fallow for a number of years until I ended up moving from Caltech to the University of Washington because Bill Gates gave me $12 million in 1992, which then was a lot more money than it is today. And that made it possible for me to start the first cross-disciplinary department ever built. And the idea was to have faculty members that were expert in chemistry and engineering, in physics, in astronomy. We had all of those, mathematics, and we had physicians as well. And what this cross-disciplinary department did in the 8 years of its existence was really remarkable because, one, Phil Green, a mathematician, invented the two key algorithms for assessing genome quality and assembling the fragments of DNA into chromosome length strings and all. And Rudy Ebersol and John Yates pioneered the emerging new field of proteomics and went on to be two of the major three architects of proteomics in the whole world. And then we invented we used the inkjet technology to create an instrument that could synthesize DNA fragments extremely rapidly that is still used today by a number of different kinds of companies. So it was enormously successful, but the big bureaucracy of a state university made it really difficult to do truly innovative things. And I had come wanting to start systems biology in the context of this cross-disciplinary environment. And I ended up in 2000 resigning from the university to start the Institute of Systems Biology. And that was really the beginning of being able to do things with a small, agile institute that could turn on a dime and could attack really hard problems in interesting ways. And it was here that we actually birthed the whole idea of data-driven science. But first, we showed systems biology could be applied to wellness and disease. We were able to define the molecular features of how galactose in yeast was actually utilized, the networks and so forth. And we actually studied a neurodegenerative disease in mice called scrapie that we could induce with infectious agents. And then we could follow the nature of the change as you move from wellness to disease. And what we showed, and it's true of all complex diseases, is there was a blinding explosion of these networks that became disease perturbed. So by the time you diagnose the disease, a single drug would only treat a symptom. It wouldn't treat the whole system. And that's really true today. And the reason I argue in data-driven health, the key to dealing with disease is not treating it. It's predicting it early and preventing it from happening. And we, in data-driven health, have figured out how to do that very, very nicely. So anyway, I would say about the first 10 years of that period of time, 2000s and all, we evoked this whole idea of medicine should be predictive, preventive, personalized, and participatory. And the first three, prediction, prevention, personalized, we can do today. We know how to manage those kinds of things. But the fourth, and that's the really critical one, is how do you persuade people? How do you persuade individuals? How do you persuade their physicians? How do you persuade healthcare systems that we ought to create this data-driven system with analyzing the genomes and phenomes for each individual so we can optimize their wellness and we can avoid disease? And the threat, of course, is all of contemporary medicine at the 98% level is focused on disease, and there is no interest, there's very little interest in prevention and being able to optimize wellness and things like that. So the participatory thing requires an enormous educational process. Mm-hmm. It requires, I think, first of all, persuading students, K through 12, that there are these opportunities. And actually, we put together at the Institute for Systems Biology an educational program that has been utterly transformational in bringing science to Seattle and, frankly, to the state of Washington. And one of the things they've done recently is taken a textbook we're just finishing now on systems biology and systems medicine, and they created a one-year high school course in 4 modules where the students actually when they finish that course, will know more about the future of medicine than 95% of the physicians out there. And these will be the kind of educated people that will embrace the opportunities for optimizing wellness, avoiding disease. And the third really key thing we want to do is extend your health span into the 90s or beyond, so that when you're 90 years old, you'll have the mental agility, the physical capacity to be creative and productive and engaged in the world. And of course, that raises really interesting sociologic questions about retirement. How do people in the 90s actually support themselves? It's really an interesting question and so forth. But this is what I see coming in the next 10 years or so. And that is exactly the vision that I created Phenome Health. And I'll give you a little more about the history, because in 2016, the CEO of Providence, a local major hospital system in 7 Western states, came to me and said, would you be chief science and would you bring genomics and scientific wellness? And that's what we call this quantitative wellness, where you optimize wellness and avoid disease and all. And I was enormously enthusiastic about this and really dove in. But Providence, like all big organizations, is enormously conservative, and people can be major roadblocks. And I won't go into any of the details, but after 4 or 5 years, we made a little bit of progress in bringing genomics in, no progress in bringing scientific wellness, that is the phenomic side of it, in. And that's when I resigned from Providence and then started Phenome Health. And so for the last 5 years now, have been on a trajectory of attempting to bring a healthcare that focuses on wellness and prevention. And we have the ability with these strategic approaches to do very much better treatment of disease. But in the end, diseases are so complicated, your treatment is only going to be partial for most of them. So why not really focus on prevention or early detection and reversal? And that's exactly the kind of things we're proposing we do. And so what is steps? Go ahead.
Well, I want to zero in on something that you said, double click on it. So I had a conversation with Dr. Michael Snyder, who I'm sure you know very well. Who
I know very well. Sure.
And he's one of those folks who are like, okay, I'm fanboy here, but he talks about that we're very good at sick care and we don't actually practice healthcare, but through innovations, wearable devices like, I've got my smartwatch on, there's other type of sensors and monitors that his lab is working on. We can get to actual healthcare. Now, you mentioned that you've been thinking and proposing the science of systems biology since the 70s, 80s, and you're still a salmon swimming upstream because, medicine is so highly specialized. And it seems that our healthcare systems doesn't think in terms of systems, even though we know it's all connected. But you go to a specialist and they diagnose a certain aspect, and we end up treating symptoms. When we think about these data points, these biometrics that you were talking about, not only our genetic signatures, but the information that we get, as you mentioned, from our blood panels, that could be a treasure trove. And then you tag on our habits, our activities, our sleep data. What kind of medical professional would it take to actually, manage this, or kind of be the go-to person to help us as consumers, as patients in this context, understand this? Or, as you just mentioned, can we as consumers be our own experts in individual health if we have the devices and, as you mentioned, training at the high school level to help us think about our bodies in terms of being a systematic organism that we can learn about and use these data points to actually become the expert of our own individual health? Is that possible?
Yeah. So that's absolutely a terrific question. And so what I would say is the wearables can provide terrific new physiologic information about our body and how it performs. And so I think the more we can explore the dimensions of human complexity with wearables, the more we're going to be able to democratize this whole data-driven type of health. And that's really critical because we want to get it to a cost level where you can think about doing this in developing countries as well as the underdeveloped kind of countries. So anyway, I would say that the second thing that's really important is what is now really making data-driven medicine possible is AI and its other related things, knowledge graphs and digital twins and all of these things. And what we at Phenome Health are doing is integrating together the actionable possibilities we've derived from 5,000 individuals analyzed over a 4-year period, which give us enormous numbers of different dimensions of wellness. And we could go and talk about specific things. The gut microbiome gives you certain kinds of information. The blood clinical chemistries give you another kind of really exciting, actionable possibilities. And of course, the ability to assess cognition in the brain gives us a real sense of where our brain function is. And because the brain is so plastic, it gives you hope that as long as you don't have diseases that have killed neurons, you can reconstitute brain function in your 80s that you had optimized in your mid-30s. So, I mean, it's remarkable what we can do with the brain and with health and things like this. So the real key question is, do I think patients and individuals can handle this on their own? Absolutely not. I don't. And I think what AI is going to do is it's going to give us 10,000 plus actionable possibilities that come from one-dimensional analyses of all these different kinds of information, proteins and metabolites and lipids and the genome, but even more important from the integration across all of those different types, because they bring a whole new array that represents the organization that actually happens in the body when you integrate together these kind of data. And what we'll be able to do with AI is make accessible to the physician these 10,000 different possibilities. One, explaining precisely what patients have to do. And two, giving the physician the clinical references that validate that as an actionable possibility. There's an enormous amount of hype in wellness these days. There's so much trivial stuff that has no basis in validation whatsoever. So we think AI brings validation to the physician, but at the same time, we can set up running profiles for patients that are simply explained and everything that give them an idea of where their genes are and where their phenome is. And more important for the patient, can demonstrate to them by practicing these actionable possibilities we designate for each individual, you can actually show that you improve the wellness and show that you can pick up the early stages of diseases that actually can be reversed and everything. And it's exciting to think in a 10-year period, maybe we'll get rid of 50% of the chronic diseases. Well, that's aggressive, but I think it's not beyond the realm of possibility. But today, chronic diseases constitute 86% of your $5 trillion healthcare budget annually. And I'm saying if we get rid of half of that, you're talking about saving trillions of dollars in healthcare. And then the fascinating question is, where does that money go? I would love to see it go to wellness and prevention rather than, as politicians in the past have done, take it to war. But that's a debate for another time and everything.
Yes.
But the whole idea is, what people don't realize, Rome, is how important health is. And the reason for that is if you're really healthy, you optimize in every way the potential you have during development, during education, during jobs, during community, during creativity, productivity, and ultimately happiness. It's being healthy and being vital, and a critical part of that for each individual is having a purpose, and you have to figure out what the purpose is for you. For me, my purpose is really very simple. I want to see data-driven health be a reality in the context of wellness and prevention in the healthcare system before I die. And I think there's a real chance that is going to happen.
That is so rich and fascinating. So I before I move on, I've got to say this when it comes to disease prevention. We have the ability through precision medicine to, through germline genetic testing, to understand our genetic predispositions, which informs our risk for developing diseases like cancer, a number of rare diseases, and even, heart, related issues like cardiomyopathy. But you mentioned the gut microbiome. I'll just mention this because, again, more context, folks, to who we're getting our information from today. You mentioned the gut microbiome, which is our immune system. And according to a paper from Rodney Dietert, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, at Cornell, and it's called The Microbiome First Medicine in Health and Safety. We'll have that link on the landing page at Genetics for Healthcare. He says because the human microbiome carries the vast majority of our genes that's in our gut, particularly the small intestine, fundamental human biology dictates that the microbiome should be front and center in any preventative or therapeutic medical plan. Now, just last year, the Nobel Prize was awarded to a Dr. Mary Brunkow, and she happens to work for Phenome Health, and she was awarded this incredible recognition for her contributions for characterizing the FOXP3 gene, which happens to be one of the few targets in the microbiome in our gut that we know now that can be targeted for therapeutic, purposes to prevent or treat different diseases. And it has just opened up a whole world of possibilities for the purpose of, the valuable time that we have with you here, Dr. Hood. I won't ask you to kind of go into that, but I just think that's phenomenal that of all of your accolades and achievements and recognitions, one of your scientists that works for your company has been awarded the Nobel Prize for the work that she has done characterizing the immune system that is going to set the foundation for how we can predict and then prevent disease in the future. I just think that's fascinating. But I'll ask you this. You talked about the effect systems biology can have on chronic diseases. Today, heart disease is still the leading cause of death of men and women in America. And even when we think about metabolic diseases like diabetes, there are 29 million people living with diabetes in America, according to the American Diabetes Association. Another 11 million are undiagnosed, and 115 million, they estimate, have pre-diabetes. Walk us through a annual wellness visit, 10 years from now, to 2036. How can systems biology be used to manage obesity and other metabolic functions that are causing this enormous, impact on the cost of healthcare, and possibly reduce the incidence of these major risk factors that are, causing death and other comorbidities that really exacerbate and increase the cost of care that could be unsustainable? How can systems biology help us manage that?
Well, that's another great question that I could take a whole episode to really answer. But let me say, in my view, prevention begins with our ability now to create polygenic scores for all the major diseases and actually for aspects of wellness and so forth. And what these polygenic scores represent are tens and sometimes hundreds of gene variants that each contribute just a very small amount to the probability that you'll get a cardiovascular disease or Alzheimer's or other things like that. And the importance of these polygenic scores is we'll want to have them by that time done for every single patient. And what the doctor will focus on especially are the high-risk diseases that you exhibit. So let's say you have cardiovascular, you have Alzheimer's, and you have a certain kind of cancer. Where the phenome comes to play is we know for those diseases, and I can tell you how we're going to find that out, but there are certain biomarkers that years ahead of time will change and say you are going to get Alzheimer's within a 5-year period of time, diagnosable Alzheimer's within a 5 or a 10-year period of time. We will know by that time how to reverse those biomarkers, bring them back to normal, and show that although you have a high genetic risk for this disease, we've conquered it. And I think we'll be able to do that for all major diseases. But even more than that, what I think we'll be able to do is optimize your wellness. For example, one of the things we can do now is we have algorithmic calculations of biological age that, again, are looking at features in your blood, your metabolites or your proteins or your clinical chemistries. And we can use an analysis, a systems analysis of your normal, the human's normal development to show that we can calculate a biological age which gives you the age your body is compared to chronologic age. The lower it is, the better you're aging, okay? And in this Airvale program, a wellness program that went on for 4 years, men and women decreased more than a year per year their biological ages in this wellness program. And in fact, my biological age now is about 15 years younger than my chronologic age. And that's why I think I'm going to be around to see everything in the future. But the really important thing is we have biological age as a health trajectory. We have your metabolic BMI. We can do a calculation that's far better than the old classic one that assesses For example, obesity and diabetes and the need for GLP-1s far more effectively than the classic one. And we're just finishing up a health trajectory for frailty or resilience. You can look at it in different ways. And we'll do one for the immune system as well and one for cognition. So these will give you 5 major different dimensions where you can optimize wellness for each of these different kinds of features. And be assured, as you age, your brain and your microbiome and your body are all working in conjunction with one another, and you're going to be functional whatever you want to do in your 90s. So that's how in a 10-year period, those are the kind of things we'll be able to do for people. And they're going to be having a health span that's expanded into the 90s or so. An interesting statistic is in the last 40 years, Americans have increased their average lifespan by 10 years. They've increased their average health span 0. And we have to change that dramatically. So it means as you get older now, you're either a caretaker or you're being taken care of. And we've got to dramatically change that failed kind of healthcare.
Dr. Lee Hood, my gosh, CEO of Phenome Health, you are an absolute treasure. And I just cannot thank you enough for giving the time to me and our audience and the whole Genetics for Healthcare team for giving this information on how we can think about true healthcare and arming ourselves with these types of information for our health and wellness journey based in science, based on real measurable biometrics.
That's the critical point. Yeah. And what I would say to your audience is watch for these things, because you're going to have access in the next 5 years to opportunities to carry out this kind of data-driven health. And we would welcome you to the exploding cadre of people that will be moving in this direction.
Well, we hope to lead the way here on Genetics for Healthcare. Dr. Hood, thank you so much for being a great guest and delivering this information that really helps and inspires our audience.
Okay, it's been my pleasure, Rome. Enjoyed talking with you.